what we're going to be doing in this video is basically walking through the safety measures and things you need to do before you actually start using this chainsaw, and also how to cut wood appropriately just so that you stay safe, because obviously chainsaws are very, very dangerous, powerful tools, and you can really hurt yourself. And also, if you're not feeling safe about any of this stuff, don't feel bad about asking someone else or an arborist to come by and do this, because you can get hurt very badly. But in this video, I'm going to be working through the basic safety stuff that should help you guys out if you want to do this. And so this chainsaw, like most chainsaws, hopefully comes with some kind of cover. I highly recommend keeping this cover in case you're going to reuse it again, because it does really help keep your blade sharp. Doesn't matter how powerful of a chainsaw you have, if your blade is dull, you're going to waste a lot of time and energy trying to cut through wood. So another thing that's probably a good idea if you plan to cut a lot of wood is to just purchase some additional new chains. Replacing these chains is pretty easy, and then you can also generally look pretty closely at these chains and determine like if they're looking rusty or they're beginning to get dull, or if this thing just really isn't cutting well. That might be one of your main problems. So having a good clean chain, obviously if your chainsaw is brand new, you don't really need to worry about that. The other thing is every chainsaw, even if it is electric, will need some kind of lubricant for the chain and the bar. And this is because you've got a lot of friction, and if you want to get the maximum life out of your chain and the maximum performance as well, do make sure you have chain lubricant here. Also, when you run out of chain lubricant, you may notice things beginning to smoke a little bit, and that's bad. So making sure you've topped up the lubricant, and as you can kind of see on this one, there is a little bit of a level indicator here, which is great. And then, because this one's electric, we don't have a gas motor and we don't need to add any fuel additives for the lubricant in the motor. But the electric chainsaws, I know they're small and they're less powerful, but they do actually do a pretty good job of cutting through wood, as I'll demonstrate soon. In terms of best practices, also before you begin cutting, make sure you have all the appropriate protective gear, so long pants, boots, gloves. Ideally you'd have more strong gloves. Also a full face shield plus earmuffs for hearing protection. This thing can, even though it's electric and not gas, it still can get pretty loud. So if you want to keep your hearing, it's very good practice to do that. I think maybe also you don't have a long sleeve shirt on too, but whatever. I'm in California, so I don't have to really complain about cold weather. The other thing is, obviously you would start by taking off the cover, but I do strongly recommend just keeping the cover on until you really need to use your chain. These chainsaws, generally they have pretty similar mechanisms in that you've got some kind of safety right here. So you press the safety and then you can move the trigger, and now if I had this plugged in, it would actually begin spinning. When this thing is plugged in, because it's electric, it'll be dead quiet. But if you had a gas one, it would be idling, so even though the chain wouldn't be moving. Another fun fact here is, like, these things you see here that are like the pointy teeth are really actually meant for when you have this thing completely buried in some tree. These teeth right here are used to help kind of pivot the chainsaw and help you like cut through the tree when you're dealing with very large trees. That's what this is for. I didn't know for the longest time. But yeah, and then in addition to that, the final thing you'll make note of before you actually begin to like plug in your chainsaw or turn it on if you have a gas powered one is that you have good chain tension. And so checking chain tension is pretty easy. Basically you just pull down and you want to make sure that it snaps back. And if you have too high chain tension, you will, even if you have lubricant, you may begin to notice like some smoke coming out as you're cutting through wood. And so in that case, that's how you know that you need to reduce your chain tension. Different models act differently. On this one, you adjust your chain tension by first loosening this like that, and then your chain tensioner is this thing right here. So you will rotate this clockwise to add tension. It should feel a little bit more tight, and I don't need it that tight, so you back off the chain tension by rotating this chain tensioner counterclockwise and then retightening this cover right here. I think most electric chainsaws are going to be very, very similar to this. And if you do need to end up replacing the chain, I have another video on that too. It's a very easy process. So once you've got your chainsaw completely like this, it's time to actually get to it. And when we're talking about how to hold chainsaws appropriately, the first thing you want to do is, it's really meant for right-handed people. They might make left-handed versions of chainsaws, but if you're right-handed, and even if you're left-handed, you're supposed to hold it like this because it's meant to be held this way. Is you want to make sure that your left arm is completely locked out, and then you would use your right arm like this. You need to always make sure that you cut like this, because with chainsaws, the rookie mistake to make is to cut with this upper section right here, and this upper quarter section of this is where the momentum on this chain kind of changes. And so if you try cutting something in this area while this thing's spinning, the chainsaw will jump back at you, and it's called kickback. And so that's another reason why we wear the full face shield here, is so that if you do get kickback, number one, your left arm should be completely locked out to help hold this chain down, or the chainsaw down. But even if that isn't the case, this safety guard right here is meant to help prevent the chainsaw from making it all the way back. And as you can see, these things are not like bulletproof, so even if this thing's coming back at you, and this happens in a split second, if you're wearing a full face shield, hopefully this will keep the chainsaw from making it all the way back and hitting you in the face, because that's the worst case scenario, and that's where we go to the ER. So that's basically one of the worst mistakes you can make with a chainsaw. The other one here is to be very smart in how or where you're cutting the wood, because as you cut branches off trees, they're going to fall, and they're going to fall somewhere. And so if you haven't already thought about where that branch is going to fall, it could end up hitting you, and you're holding a chainsaw. So you might get hit, you might drop the chainsaw, and that's very scary stuff. So I know I'm doing a lot of talking about the safety stuff, but it's very important to understand all these things you need to be aware of before you actually begin cutting anything. In addition to that, as you're cutting a tree, I think most people think you just cut like this, and this is a valid way to cut. So you're holding it like this, and as you're moving down, this chain is moving this way. What you'll find is that the chain kind of grabs into the tree, and so the chainsaw will actually be pulling itself into the tree as you're holding it. So be ready for this thing to kind of be pulling this way if you're cutting with this side of the chain. So the places you can use the chainsaw to actually cut wood, especially if you're near this, would be this lower section here and this top section here. Avoid anything around the tip. Avoid anything, especially in this area. This is the danger zone. I like Archer. In this area right here, if you cut in this area, you run the risk of getting kickback, which is where the chainsaw will do this, hit you in the face. You'll go to the ER. Your face won't look so good afterwards, probably. And so that's the danger zone. So do not cut in this area. I cannot emphasize that enough. Cut only with this top section here or this bottom section here. If you're cutting with the bottom section here, be ready for the chainsaw to kind of pull itself into the tree. And ideally, that's not really that dangerous. The other one is if you start cutting with this, the chainsaw or the chain is moving like this, you'll actually find the chainsaw kind of pushing back towards you. And so with your arm, you got to be ready to kind of help push when it starts pushing back to you. And so that is what you need to know about how to use this thing. Just to reiterate, the PPE, the safety equipment you need to have: full face shield, gloves on both hands, a completely locked out left arm, and never cutting with this section of the chainsaw. Cut, especially if you're just near this, just cut here, because the chainsaw will probably pull into the tree, and it's not that bad if it pulls away from you. And never have a chainsaw running when you are examining the chain tension. Make sure you have adequate chain tension. Make sure you have a lubricant for your chain and your bar. It's actually filled up. These things, if they're brand new, do not have any. And once you've done that, now you guys are ready to finally begin using a chainsaw. And I'm sorry it took a while to get here, but that is all the safety stuff you need to know. And so now I do have these trees behind me, or parts of trees, And so what we're going to start off doing is cutting this thing right here using, I think, the technique that most people think you use, which is just straight down like this. And the other thing I want to hit home here is like different types of tree and different types of chains will cut differently. Some trees, the wood is a lot harder to cut through, and so this makes things a lot more challenging. Be ready for potentially like a harder time cutting through the wood using a chainsaw if the kind of wood you have is very tough, because it might be. So with all that out of the way, I will put on the safety equipment, and we're going to cut through this right here, like so. So another thing I like to do after you've plugged in is just give it a few times, hit it a few times. See how this thing, it keeps moving after you let go of the throttle, or whatever you want to call this. So just be ready for it to keep spinning even after you let go of it. It does help kind of just help you realize that this thing is very powerful and it'll keep spinning. So yeah, with that out of the way, we're finally going to actually cut this thing using the first technique that people who are new to this should probably do. And that's just cutting straight down like that. So completely locked out left arm. Also make sure the chainsaw is spinning before you touch the wood. Do not press it down on the wood and then turn it on. That's not good. So if you have the chain, make sure the chain is already spinning and then cut through. So like this. Just like that. It's pretty straightforward and easy. Keeping the left arm locked out. The other technique you'll see people sometimes do is they'll cut up with the top part of this bar. And the reason they do that is as you're cutting through these things, depending on what angle it's at, the wood can pinch on the blade and it will grab the chain and it'll be harder to move this. So what you're going to do in these cases is you're going to put your chain like this, and you're going to make like a small incision upwards a little bit, and then you'll come down with the top part of the chain like this. So to show that technique, here's what it looks like. So you can begin cutting it, and you can just cut it all the way up, but sometimes what you'll see is, like if you're on a tree and you're doing this, people will make it partially all the way up, and then they'll actually finish from the top down just so it kind of falls off, and now you don't need to worry about pinching the chain. So just and so that's the other way to use the chainsaw. And then I think finally what I would like to show is another technique where sometimes people will cut like this when you hold the chainsaw at a side like this. This is a useful technique, but obviously start with the basics first before you begin to do these other things. And also, if you're still new to this, do not start cutting up like this, because what might happen as the chainsaw is kind of pulling its way out is it'll start trying to cut in that danger zone up here, and that's where you can really get screwed up. So start out by cutting like this, get really used to cutting like this. Once you're used to that, try a few times cutting upwards like this. Feel how the chainsaw is kind of pulling its way back and trying to cut in that bad area. And then finally, if you're comfortable with that stuff, you can begin cutting sideways like this. And so what we have here on this tree, you can see this, it's a branch like that, and hopefully it'll stay up for me. Here. Like so, and you can see how you can cut it from the side like this. And again, walking out the left arm. If you do get kicked back when you're holding a chainsaw like that, it's going to go this way, so still potentially dangerous, but not as dangerous. And so the way you do it is you just hold it. And gently move it to the side like that. So, yeah, this is the basic introduction to using a chainsaw. I hope it helps, and thank you guys for watching, and take care.